Good evening, my friends. Tonight I have a lot to say. I have a hell of a lot to say. Last night we had a sold out, packed event in a working men's club, the top floor of a working men's club in Stanley, where I grew up in County Durham. And a lot of people very concerned about the number of Conservatives defecting to Reform UK. But I'm here to reassure you, I'm here to tell you that I will never become a Conservative. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, well, I must be a complete brain dead moron. So we will never, ever do that. I've spoken to Zia Youssef yesterday, and I can confirm we will never support this. Both of us are on the board. Time to actually get real here. I'll tell you all. But my friends, thank you very much for your company as ever. It's time to get reasoned, isn't it? Reasoned and reformy. Welcome to the Reasoned live stream with me, Darren Grimes. This is, of course, your dose of unfiltered, uncensored British common sense in a world gone mad, frankly, with Labour betrayal and Conservatives. If you're sick of the establishment's spin, the BBC's bias, the lefties in Labour causing absolute havoc from everything from our borders to our energy bills, you name it. Well, smash that like button, my friends. Hit subscribe and drop your thoughts in the chat. I can see all of them right now. Lots of people saying hello. Hello to you too. My friends, I say this every week, but I feel like I have to. You're not alone in this fight. Together, we'll cut through the nonsense. Together, we will win. Together, we will save our country. Right, let's dive in. The establishment's propaganda machine, right, it's whirring louder than one of those knackered North Sea rigs after Ed Miliband closed them all down. But we've got the spanner to jam it back to health. While you're battling your bills and there's a slew of anti-reform babble in your schools and all the rest of it, the BBC, my friends, is busy burying the truth about who is really crumbling in British politics today. Were you to trawl through the pages of the Beeb, or indeed the local press in the northeast of England, and I'm sure it's true for other parts of the country too, you would be of the view that Reform councillors elected in May in overwhelming numbers, especially for a new party, a new entrant to the political market, you would think that the Reform Party was on its arse, that actually we're all on the way out, that we've been so thoroughly incompetent that we're donezo. Nothing could be further from the truth. I want to kick off by exploring the blatant bias that's been exposed by a good friend of mine within Reform UK. We need to carve through some of the green guff that's leaving us skint and shivering. Honestly, it's getting worse. It's getting worse. We need to talk about the fact that Glasgow, a city of sanctuary in which migrants are prioritised for accommodation, once known as the drug capital of Europe with severe parts of deprivation. 1 in 3 people don't speak English. We need to talk about that jury stitch-up as well, because Alison Pearson has had a good amount of thought put into this, and I think she's right on this, and I want to explain why. And then, of course, that Financial Times load of bollocks on Tory defections and pact whispers between Reform and the Tories. My line is going to be drawn in the sand. I would sooner walk than park my bus alongside the Tory party. They had the chance, they well and truly blew it, and stuck 2 fingers up at voters like you and I. So, that's 5 segments of unfiltered fury from me tonight, my friends. Let's dismantle the dribble. Now, BBC, in its coverage of Reform UK, our number crunchers, right, have been through the lot, right, and they've dropped a bomb. Since May the 1st, we've shed 42 councillors, some of them by-elections in which we've won, by the way, won those seats back. It could have been because of ill health or whatever else. There was one case of ill health in Darlington. The media didn't report that the cost of that by-election. When one of our Reform councillors in County Durham resigned because of ill health, i.e. cancer, they ran stories on the cost of the by-election. How come it's different for Labour in Darlington than it is for reform in Durham? Could it be because they're different political parties? Their bias, it's there to see if you just look for it. The BBC, though, has splashed 95% of those 42 resignations, I should say, as if it was the scandal of the century, right? Like this was Watergate 2.0. But Labour and the Conservatives have hemorrhaged 389 seats between them. 207 of them are Labour and 182 of them are Conservative. Yet Anti Beeb is only bothered about a pitiful 15.7%. Well, that's not news, right? That's a shield for the uni party that we've all, quite frankly, had enough of. BBC, I can see your bias. It's hanging out your back end. The Open Council data went through the receipts, right? So, scraping 98 wins in May, right? The Labour Party lost 207 in 6 months. That's, to me, is a bigger story than losing 42 councillors. Would you not agree? The Conservative Party, 182 of them vanished. So together, that's £1.3 million of your hard-earned cash torched on by-elections, right? Each one clocking roughly £25,000 in places like Newark, for example, which is Robert Jenrick's seat, and Sherwood. And The Guardian, hardly our cheerleaders, well, they clocked Farage hogging the News at 10 slots more than the Lib Dems back in September. But why the blackout there, right? In the bias within the allocations of resources when it comes to covering reform over covering the other parties. Well, it's because to the BBC, we are the rising threat. We are the threat to everything that they hold dear, their cosy metropolitan liberalism. If our sneezers make headlines, right, on the Beeb all the time, where's the spotlight on the uniparty sewage? We need to defund the dinosaur if it continues to stand against the people in this way. The licence fee is certainly long since past its sell-by date. It's stinking. Your fridge, it honks. Get rid. The other side of the ledger, though, in that same period, as I say, Labour lost 207 councillors, the Tories lost 182. That's nearly 400 councillors from the so-called grown-up parties who've quit, defected, or been suspended in a 6-month period. Can I ask you, my friends, how many of those have you seen reported? How many? Answer me that. I'll tell you how many. The number that the BBC reported from those is 15.7%, a measly 15.7%. Let that sink in, my friends. What does this mean? Reform lose 42 people, a mere drop in the ocean compared to the tidal wave of uniparty losses. Well, it's a national crisis. It's a national crisis. Farage is on the way out. Reform are incompetent. The people didn't know what they were voting for. But the establishment lose 389 of their own, and it's total silence. Silence! And it's not just that they're leaving, right? It's why they're leaving that's not reported. And I think this is why it isn't reported by the established media. When a reform candidate gets suspended, right, it's usually over something like, I don't know, something's happened, something in the past, the left have gone trolling through social media accounts and found a post, whatever else. But look at what the BBC is hiding about Labour and the Tories and the Lib Dems. I've got a list right here. So, David Graham, a Labour councillor in Fife, he was suspended and jailed. Why? Well, he sexually abused a 15-year-old girl. Did you see that reported anywhere? Did you see that? Did you see that? Dennis Jones, a Labour former leader in Peterborough, suspended for calling grooming gang victims poor white trash. Did you see that reported anywhere, my friends? Did you see that? Councillor Ifran Mohammed, Labour in Lambeth in London, charged with sexual assault and get this, showing women homemade videos of him having a little play, shall we say. Did you hear about that? Ryan Ray, a Tory councillor in Peterborough. What is it with Peterborough? Keep it in your pants. Charged with sexual activity with a minor. Stephen Fraser, a Tory in Breckland, arrested for smashing the window of a local business. And another one, Labour councillor, in which a headline read, Councillor leaves the council after being caught high on drugs whilst driving. And it didn't mention that it was a Labour councillor. You can bet your bottom dollar, right, that if it had been a Reform councillor, that would have been reported. You can bet your bottom dollar. I promise you that. There is inherent bias throughout the whole mainstream media in a really unfair way that actually paints Reform as being in the doldrums when actually the Uniparty doesn't get the same level of scrutiny. And I think actually it's a sign of total inherent bias. I don't know what all of you think, but look, to me, it's clear as day, crystal clear, actually. I can't actually fathom it. Oh, Guy says, good you are bringing this up. I have a list identical to you, plus more, many more. See, it's out there. I'm telling you, you don't have to look too hard. You don't have to look hard at all. Victoria says, not a bloody peep out of any of it. The mainstream media runs for cover. It's true. It's true. It's totally true. Now, my friends, speaking of the establishment's total stitch up of we as the poor, downtrodden, tax-paying electorate, squeezed like a pulp. If you're a taxpayer these days, why bother? Sit your ass down on universal credit. Keep yourself warm. Get the state to pay for your energy bills. It's the only way you're going to actually be able to pay for your bills. Let's have a look at this. So the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is the watchdog that monitors the Chancellor's budgets, they revealed that a £1 billion a year will be added to household bills to fund Ed Miliband's next auction for renewable projects. So he's throwing green welfare at these vested green interests growing fat on your taxpayer cash. And in this auction, he's effectively saying to them, come one, come all, as he doles out your money like it's sweets on Halloween. Trick or treat? Well, Ed Miliband says, only a treat for you, my green vested interests, my green fat cats. Here, have some taxpayer cash. Why not? Why the hell not? It's not like we're struggling in this country, is it? He's the eco-evangelist who actually vowed to shave £300 off your energy bills. Rachel Reeves stood up at that dispatch box and announced that she was moving the green levies off of your energy bills and putting it into general taxation instead. You might look at your energy bill and think, oh, that's a little bit better. It ain't gonna be though, because this auction is going to make prices even higher, focusing us on unreliable renewables that won't. We are one of the least sunny countries in the globe. And when the wind gets too windy, well, you can't generate energy. They have to turn them off. I'm not joking, it's true. And this is what Ed Miliband wants to dole out UK taxpayer cash for. So I say to this, my friends, quite frankly, that this is another sign of the complete betrayal and lies by the Labour Party. The Ofgem latest, of course, was that the energy cap is going up in January, despite being told it would come down. Your average household bill is going to be £1,755 yearly. That's going up from October. It's not gassy whims, right? This is wines coming from the green elite. The actual net zero nonsense has wasted £815 this year idling wind farms because the grid gasps and isn't able to take in the energy. don't get that with gas. Right? With gas, you you just don't get that. It comes through the pipes. It's not the same thing. You control it. But actually, we're being warned of £4 to £8 billion annually by 2030 in pursuit of net zero. And the subsidies are enough to make one of those migrants on universal credit, 1.23 million of them in this country, by the way, well, actually, they'd make them blush because offshore wind is £155 per megawatt hour. That's 60% from your pocket going to fund these wind farms. They're laughing all the way to the bank. Never mind a climate emergency, we've got a cash emergency. And it's Ed Miliband that's doling it out like there's no tomorrow. They're talking about these carbon hikes. 37.7%. How can British industry survive in that? Why do you think they're all going abroad? We just lost a factory in Peterlee in County Durham. Why is that? Well, it's because we've tied ourselves to EU schemes on carbon hikes, right? Miliband is totally blind to the truth here and the cuts. He doesn't care. He's impoverishing all of us. Factories are folding. Chinese electric vehicles. How many have you seen on the roads? I spot them all the time. And this is happening because we're exporting our industry over there and then we buy them back off them. Can't you see that China has net zero as its greatest ally? You know, jobs evaporating like you wouldn't believe in this gutsy fantasy from one man, Mad Miliband. And I guess the cherry on the cake for me, my friends, would be very, very simple indeed. And it would be, I don't know if anyone's seen this, but I have to show you it because it's from Twitter today. And I looked at it, and to me, nothing speaks of the excesses of the Green movement, the complete contempt for the working class that they have, the disregard for working people whilst they claim to champion the working class. It smacks to me of sheer ignorance for the very worst vestiges of a movement that preaches solidarity with working people but achieves quite the bloody opposite. You'll have probably seen this so far today, but I have to show it in case not. So, I said on X, they've just dumped bags of shit, pardon my French, in the Ritz. Have a watch of this video. So you see there in this clip the cherry on the cake of the net zero movement, the contempt that they have for each of us, my friends. They pour shit all over the floor of the Ritz, right? They say that this is up the workers, right? That this is showing one for the man. It's not. It's not doing anything of the sort. I'll tell you what this is doing, my friends. This dump of crap in the Ritz, right? A glitzy hotel. Who do you think's going to clear that up? Is it going to be the middle classes screeching about net zero, supporting Ed Miliband on all these green schemes? No. These sacks of crap being put under a Mayfair tree by 3 posh protesters. One of them, by the way, an NHS worker. There's an ex-doctor there. I'm worried about radicalisation of people within the National Health Service that we've all got to rely on. They screech about tax the rich. But This is the net zero stink because these are trust fund privileged prats virtue signalling while you ration your heating bill, and it'll be the cleaners, the working class cleaners, that have to pick this up. It's not going to be the middle class prats. It's not going to be the Ed Miliband's of the world. While you're paying billions over in levies and green levies for the fat green welfare and green vested interests, why don't they protest against those making millions, making a mint out of the net zero con? While actually, 1 billion extra is coming down the tracks for us. The capacity costs are going to be £4.6 billion by 2030. I say that these people, these middle class idiots, ought to be arrested. I say that they ought to then be made to clean toilets, that they ought to do the jobs of the people that will have to pick up their poo, right? I want them to do that. I want to see embarrassment brought back to British justice. That's the way in which you stop these people doing this kind of thing. If they have to do the jobs and suffer the consequences of their actions, they'll sharp stop doing it. I tell you that right now. They will not know what it's like to scrub crap up from a floor like that, to scrub a toilet, to get down on their knees and scrub like their life depends on it because they need to make their next bill payments. They don't know what that's like. Make them do it. Bring back embarrassment for those who commit acts of criminality, and the criminality will sharp stop. We had it right in the past. Bring it back for today. I'm telling you, that's the solution. But Reform's fix for energy, though, is quite simple. We drill the North Sea. We drill, baby, drill. We ditch the subsidies. Northeast Mayor Kim McGuinness challenged me on this. She said, 29,000 jobs are linked to net zero. What are you going to do about the green jobs? If these green jobs and the green industry, the green industrial revolution that they speak about so like a mad professor announcing like he's found gold or, managed to create a cure for cancer. They speak about these things with such zealotry. If this green industrial revolution is so wonderful, it can stand on its own two sodden feet. It can survive without sucking the taxpayer teat dry. The teat is red raw. It's hanging on by a thread. British energy for British homes, British people. Before we're all actually wading through the bankruptcy fiscal filth that Labour is shoveling on us like those middle class prats shovel shite upon the Ritz. I'm telling you that now. I'm telling you that right now. Marty says they need to get proper jobs and work. Foul. I agree. Grumpy says, my good friend Grumpy, who I love dearly, the left are getting more extreme. The more they get away with, the worse they'll get. I agree. This is the problem. We need to embarrass them. We need to make them think twice about their actions. Not for you to know, says that on the Christmas tree, pouring the poo, is this not a hate crime? Well, yes, of course. Actually, if that crap was shoveled outside of a religious institution that wasn't Christian, they would be arrested for a hate crime, wouldn't they? That's a good point. That's a very good point. One to think about, I dare say. But my friends, another story that caught my eye, and I've been thinking about this quite strongly, is around the way in which that so-called sanctuary cities are actually showing that the multicultural lie that's been painted to each of us, well, the chickens are very much coming home to roost. They really are. They really, really are. While Ed Miliband is actually ensuring that each of us can't afford to power our homes, power our lives cheaply and in an affordable way, keep our jobs by keeping the factories open. Well, the SNP, who have a sanctuary city in Glasgow, in which actually so-called refugees get prioritised for housing in what was known as the drug capital of Europe, Glasgow, in which there is real deprivation, in which people are struggling. Well, they have a language crisis that's draining the coffers even further. There was, in this Daily Express article, Scottish government data, totally fresh, right? 28.8% of Glasgow's nearly 72,000 pupils, right? That's 20,000 kids, nearly 21,000 kids. They treat English as additional, right? That's up from a third from 22.5% in 2019. That is actually a huge margin, right? To go up from just 2019. They say, come on, come all to Glasgow. So you get people going up there. They arrive at the southern border. They go up there because they get preferential treatment. This is Scotland being put last by the SNP. The sooner we get these tartan-clad swines out of office, the better. Listen, I'm all for people celebrating being Scottish. I really am. I think the Scots are bloody marvellous. I love going to Glasgow. I really do. But I hate what's been done to it by the SNP. They're not nationalists. They care more about globalism. They're globalists, not nationalism, globalists. That's exactly what they are. They care more about putting foreign nationals first than they do the great people of Scotland. In Edinburgh, the figure is 22.1%, right? In Aberdeen, it's 21.6%. In primary schools, 1 in 3 are needing English language crutches to get themselves through education. That's over 7,000 straining a teacher short system in which you can't spend money on getting Scottish kids through education. And there are too many Scottish kids, by the way, leaving school unable to actually do the basics. You cannot put money into it because you're busy trying to teach people the lingo. And they still say, come on, come all. They have these watchwords of the moment about being kind, tolerant, accepting, open. And it's Scottish people that suffer the consequence of this. Glasgow is the asylum capital. That's 65 per 10,000 residents, right? They're league leaders. Net migration is 50,000 yearly. The population is swelling, right? There is a staggering failure to actually integrate with silos of communities that simply aren't bothered about learning English. They don't need to, right? The state's there to look after them. I say that you ought to say, sod off, right? Learn the lingo or don't get out. It ought to be as simple as that. Why should I have to fund some lazy lout who doesn't want to integrate into our way of life? So much so that they won't even learn the lingo. This puts great strain on everything from the NHS, and I've just mentioned education, but whole swathes of the public sector. And we wonder why councils are going bankrupt. It's staggering failure. Standards in education are tanking. Cohesion is totally cracking. You've got ghettos around Glasgow of groups that don't speak English. Cohesion is totally cracking. The economy is buckling as people speak Arabic, over a nice Glaswegian lingo, i.e. English. There's Urdu lessons being had, right? Mohammed is the top boy's name, of course. They say, these local councillors in Scotland, we need funding. Well, maybe if you just stopped opening the gates and breeding ghettos, you wouldn't need the funding, right? The East End are totally furious. over what are commandeered schools, right? It's protests and the asylum. I actually see Scotland at boiling point, and to me, my friends, that's exactly why Reform UK are doing so well there. There's a borders bill, right, where you're clear to me that the welfare vortex for foreign nationals is starving local people of investment and cash. And Trump was in the press, right? He was criticized for saying that Somalian migrants shouldn't be coming to America. Well, actually, in this country, Somalians are some of the biggest recipients of welfare, and actually on the crime statistics feature all too heavily too. The integration fairy tale that we've been sold for years and years, well, it is just that, a fairy tale, right? It is a massive, massive fairy tale. Borders or bust. That has to be Reform's message to the Scottish people at the next election, right? Vote against the SNP before actually the asylum hub that they speak about with such pride is dragging us all down. I find it disgusting, actually, in a place in which has so many problems, that actually the answer is to prioritise foreign nationals. I can't imagine a bigger betrayal of the British people in Scotland. I really can't. Can anyone make heads or tails of this? I just find it sickening. Totally sickening. BRT says reform all the way. Still a few years to go, but as it stands, it's a reform for me. We all have a vote. Use it wisely. Might be our last chance. I couldn't agree more. Not for you to know, says Trump is based. Bolt says, everyone I talk to feels the same way. Nigel will get a landslide. Michael points out that Fife is being flooded. Fife, of course, in Scotland. Yeah, so many of you really angry about this. I totally agree. I totally agree with all of you. Jack says if you can't speak English after being in England for 2 years, you should be deported. Yeah. Grumpy says a multicultural society doesn't work, especially when foreigners don't want to make an effort to mix. Totally agree. Totally agree. Okay, my friends. So I need to talk about Jamie, right? And this is in the context of David Lammy's complete and utter madness, lunacy when it comes to the legal system, right? So he's decided that what this country really needs is to be done with jury trials. So forget, I know I mentioned this last week, but forget the Magna Carta and the rights that that gave the individual, right? To be heard from your peers, no longer in secret rooms by an overbearing monarch would a trial be held, but actually among your peers instead. Well, David Lammy's doing away with that. Now, Jamie here was an ex-Marine who faced a trial over a Facebook post. It went to court. He was heard. The court was heard by a jury. It was a jury trial. And it took them 17 minutes to say he wasn't guilty, right? For a Facebook crime. And Alison Pearson, the wonderful Telegraph journalist, points out that this shows why Lammy's agenda here is so completely dangerous. He is, of course, the history butcher who thinks that Henry VIII tailed, Henry VII tailed Henry VIII, right? So maybe him shredding Magna Carta to clear the backlog of court cases. Maybe we shouldn't be all that surprised. He's clearly a wazzock who doesn't know his arse from his elbow. But I digress. Shredding the Magna Carta, right? By axing the juries for either way offences. Any offence that's under a 3-year threshold or jail time will get a judge alone trial. Now, a judge alone case, so called swift courts, he's calling it, are 20% faster. That's what he says, 20% faster. Because we've got a backlog of 78,000. That's going to be predicted to be 100,000 by 2028. He says that this is bold, right? That this is brave, that this is necessary to get the backlog down, to get justice for the British people. I call it complete and utter balderdash. This is an authoritarian slide. This is watered from a leak that came out, watered down, but it's still bad. It got cabinet kickback and a bar council backlash, right? Labour's own Clive Efford warned that actually this is about us and them justice. Della Creasy said, oh, well, juries are 3% anyhow. Not the point, right? David Lammy, during COVID, damned non-jury trials as a bad idea, right? So they were proposed, obviously, during COVID because they didn't want people to gather in the same vicinity, same spaces. He said then it was a bad idea. Now he's peddling that to actually, in what he says is an easing of victim torment, right? Ignoring defendant games. But I actually think this is the beginning of the end of a rich inheritance that we have held in this country for, nearly 1,000 years? Not that far off. Couple of 100 years. So we are undoing all of the history of Englishmen who believed in freeborn rights, free of tyranny, to be heard from your peers, to actually ensure a fair trial, a fair hearing. This is the beginning of the end of British justice, and it would be people like Jamie here who will be found guilty by our activist judiciary. I fear it. Look, I've been through several what I would call biased police interventions before. I see this being a recipe for disaster. How many people on the wrong side of politics, will actually be hauled over the judicial coals in the name of speeding up and solving David Lammy's backlog? The only thing that's backlogged is his bloody brainwaves. I'll tell you that for free. The juries would, I believe, clear the wrong sorts, as they did Jamie Michael. As I say, an ex-Marine. He has the scars of Iraq, Afghanistan. He did a 12-minute Facebook post after Southport, and he said about scumbags invading. He said we need to protect our kids. Well, he was snitched on, and he was nicked at work. He was remanded in custody for 17 days. Told, guilty plea, that'll be the way to go. Well, the Free Speech Union intervened, who are heroes, by the way, the only trade union I've got any time for these days. The rest of the trade unions, as I well know, I was listening to a trade union representative just last week reading out a letter in which I was told that flying our national flags is offensive and off-putting to gay people and offensive and off-putting to migrant groups. Our national flag. You're a trade unionist, you're meant to represent the working class. It's the working class who are flying our flags in an act of civic pride. They are so totally removed from the people they purport to serve. The whole of the political left are like that now these days. But the Free Speech Union is a light, a beacon of hope and truth in a midst of trade union absolute nightmarish hell. So they got Jamie some help, and the jury I believe it was in Method Tidville. I think that's where that is there. I think Jamie's Welsh. I could be totally wrong on that, but I'm assuming he is. It took them 17 minutes, my friends, to decide he wasn't guilty, right? That to me wouldn't have happened with a really activist judicial type. I'm really worried about it. You know, commonplace views are increasingly viewed by our elites as complete poison. I see that with judges. I see that in the British judicial system. You'll be judged for hate, but hate is subjective, right? I'm offended by bollocks to Brexit signs. Would I report someone at the police and expect them to gan at the slammer? No, I wouldn't. Juries over robes. That's what I say. This isn't about busting the backlog. This is about dissent crushing. They know that their political opponents will be crushed by this in our courts. Reform would say absolutely bollocks to this. You know, no way, Jose. The whole of our justice system needs total root and branch reform. This is about something more sinister, I believe, than seeking to actually expedite court cases and seek justice. It does the opposite of that, my friends. And I say that with my hand on heart. I know what it's like to go through this. I sympathise entirely with someone like Jamie and Lucy Connolly and all the rest of it. Political prisoners. You're going to see a absolute explosion of political prisoners being stuffed in our jails because activist judges have been able to get them in there, bypassing common sense juries. It worries me. Not on Reform's watch, I tell you that. Not on Reform's watch. Dave says, will Reform reverse this? Absolutely, you can bet your bottom dollar. Not for you to know says, you're right, Darren. The whole point of this is to persecute dissenters. Yep, I'm worried. Guy says, the Free Speech Union rock. I agree. Grumpy says, people from the right won't get a fair trial without a jury because our judges are so left-wing. I totally agree. It's institutionalized capture. Michael says, building up to 5-year mandatory Fabian trials. Ooh. Grumpy, Starmer is a tin pot dictator who is getting worse by the day. Victoria, first they abolished free legal defence for anything that carries a sentence for less than 18 months. Then they started inventing new hate crime laws. Not for you to know says, I wish Lucy Connolly demanded a jury trial. So do I. So do I, because she would not have been jailed. She wouldn't have been. Yeah, you're all absolutely right. Active in that chat. Thank you so much for being so. Right, the story I promised you that I would talk about, I'd give you my 2 penneth on. The Financial Times have, gone into overdrive about packed panic. Tory defectors. I need to explain this really quite simply, right? People join the Reform Party and they become members of Reform. You know the drill. Many of you are members of the Reform Party. But joining Reform is very different from being, gifted with the chance to stand for Parliament, the chance to run for whatever office a former Tory might want the guts and the glory to seize. It doesn't mean that Nigel is sat with all of them saying, come one, come all. A joining of the party is just that. I'm happy to take the membership subscriptions of former Conservative politicians, but I would resign before I back more betrayal from the Conservatives. So this Financial Times splash yesterday is debunked as complete bollocks. Nigel Farage allegedly whispering to donors that Reform expects a deal with the Conservatives before the next election. a pact to supposedly clear the path to number 10 Downing Street. Have you seen the Conservatives in the polls recently? I think when it's made clear that it's Reform or Labour at the next election, people are going to vote Reform. Farage denied it. Denied it flat. He said it's rubbish. And the Tories insist under Kemi Badenoch that there's no deals to be had, no pacts, no cozying up. But people are worried because they see ex-Tory MPs lining up, right? Jumping ship to Reform. All of them unseated in 2024 after the Boris betrayal, the Boris wave of mass migration completely transforming our country in the most undemocratic, totally against everything they promised in their manifesto to vote leave and take back control and actually get Brexit done. Well, that wasn't Brexit to me, allowing mass migration on an unprecedented scale to come to this country. The net zero madness that now Labour have gold plated, right? All of that was done under a Conservative Party and a Conservative prospectus that none of us expected, anticipated, or voted for, or even campaigned for, heart and soul. I'm happy to admit they fooled me, right? But fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, well, you must be thicker than David Lammy. Whammy Lammy, Calamity Lammy. They're eyeing up green pastures in Reform colours, right? It ain't happening. It ain't happening. I was reading the Telegraph earlier, and Tom Jones, not the singer, it's not unusual because the Conservatives are shit. Not him. Tom Jones, a columnist in the Telegraph, says that the Reform Party are the rising sun, right? The Tories are the setting sun. Now, this is a sort of Marcus Aurelius style pitch that these rats are swimming our way because their ship's got more holes than a poor sod in Vietnam, right? Below the waterline. But the rub here is that actually I'm happy for people like Andrew Jenkins, who, by the way, took a massive risk in coming over to stand in in Lincolnshire as the mayoral candidate. She wasn't expected to win, by the way. She had to work for it, and she did. People like me, dare I say, who've gone into local government for reform, trying to build up a national picture, but not former Tory MPs who just want a nice, easy seat and win under a reform banner. If you didn't champion our values as a party, which have been evident for many years now, and you're only joining now when reform are doing well, but you weren't there to help us when we weren't doing too well, well, you're here for the glory and not actually the hard slog. So no is the answer. No, 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 as Maggie would say. We do need experience within our political ranks. I don't doubt that, right? Political nous, parliamentary nous, to school fresh faces. But I don't think that comes at any price. Like Nadine Dorries, to me, Online Safety Act, no, no. They're basically, front bench fossils, old relics who peddled censorship that we vow to scrap, right? And the Boris loyalists on everything from net zero to mass migration who utterly betrayed their electorate, no, jog on. So I'll happily take their membership subscriptions and I'll happily learn from their expertise. But as Tom Jones, again, not the singer, warns us, you inherit their baggage, you inherit their failures when you take these people in. They won't be parliamentary candidates. I'd be out before I back more Tory betrayal. Zia Yusuf would be out before he backs more Tory betrayal. We're not a dumping ground for Tory washouts, the ones who broke our borders, the ones who hiked our taxes, the ones who sold out the working class, who I want to champion, defend, and robustly speak to the values and core feelings of, right? Welcome to the good uns, right? Who want to actually advise us and all the rest of it, who now see the light. Fine, right? Happy days. But a pact to prop up a failing Tory caucus in which half of the parliamentary party still thinks we need net zero, in which half of the parliamentary party still thinks we can't leave the ECHR, which champions the so-called human rights of terrorists, of people that have absolutely no right to be here, illegal aliens. Well, no deal. Go join and make a pact with the sodden Liberal Democrats, right? You're both as bad as each other. Lily-livered liberals, not people that recognise the scale of the challenge. The challenge being that if we do not get this right by 2029, whenever Starmer calls an election or whoever replaces Starmer, it could happen by 2027 in my view, we've got to be ready. And we will not be ready if we are keeping up a moribund husk of the so-called Conservative Party. No deal, right? No deal. No way, Jose. Starmer mocked it at Prime Minister's questions, right? As an unholy alliance of austerity and failure. Well, hot kettle black, mate. What have you done? Your idea of austerity is to make all the taxpayers lie to them, say that you needed to raise taxes when you didn't, all for a bung to 1.23 to 26 million migrants, giving them universal credit, bumping their benefits up, paying for their kids in a bung. You're exactly the same. You're all the same. No way, Jose. What we need to do is show people who still vote Conservative that they're finished, that they are donezo. The right does need to unite. I get that. I agree with that. But the right needs to unite around Reform UK, right? It should be our ideas that are championed. It should be our cause which is championed. It should be our policies, philosophies, and all the rest of it which are championed. We are rising because we reject the rot, not because we recycle it. And I couldn't make that any clearer, my friends. So I hope that reassures people. I really do. Victoria says, bloody hell, Darren, no one can accuse Reform candidates of not being able to speak their minds. Well, yes. Well, look, I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said. You know, they're not, the party have said that they don't want a Reform pact. Not going to happen. No, not for you, says, you are based, Darren. I think Reform should make you an MP candidate for the next general election. Well, you know, I will serve however people, if the party want that to happen, I would do it. But you know what? I've got an important job right now. So I'm enjoying what's going on at Reform in Durham. We just blocked a solar farm, an industrial scale solar farm, right? It'll go to the Secretary of State, i.e. Ed Miliband, and he could overrule us. But to be part of a movement that's doing that, saying that sheets of metal and glass being paved over our rural heartlands, rejecting that, that's what I believe in. That's what makes my heart beat, right? That's what I'm about. That's what Reform is about. So I've got an important mission as it stands right now. BRT said the biggest prize would be Jacob Rees-Mogg. I love him. Well, BRT, I argued with Jacob Rees-Mogg on his GB News show, and I'll be perfectly honest, I think he is totally blinded by loyalty to see that the party that he loves and joined way back when as a child has changed beyond all recognition. If he doesn't realise that, then that's him. That's up to him. Grumpy says, we need more experience, but we don't need more of the same Tories rubbish. They'll need to prove themselves. Harold says, well done. A brilliant Bonnie lad. Definitely a young Nigel. You definitely speak truth and sense. Well, that's incredibly kind. High praise indeed. Not for you to know says, the only pact between Reform and the Conservatives should be the Conservatives to stand down like Brexit Party did in 2019. Exactly. And we were betrayed then. Such a good point. So they don't split the vote. Absolutely. If they are patriots, they will stand down, unite the right by allowing Reform to represent the people. Grumpy says, Nigel trusted the Tories once and he never will again. Dave says, do it, Darren. Go for Parliament and rule over the people who try to prosecute you over Brexit funding. That is funny. Me versus the regulators. That's funny. Can you imagine that? LG Life is Good said, Reform is full of Tories now, so what's the difference? I can tell you this for sure, right? And by the way, I see you like Master Yoda. I'm a big Star Wars fan, bit of a geek when it comes to Star Wars. But keep the faith, right? The Force is with you. The Force is with Reform. Because I tell you this, I was in a packed out, sold out room in a working men's club, big, the sort of old rooms of old, where you would sell out these venues in massive amounts of decline, Labour putting up business rates. These places are going to be totally gone. But we sold one of them out yesterday. And the number of people that have never voted before but feel galvanised to support Reform because they recognise what's happening to their country is irreversible if we don't get this right. Well, a lot of these people aren't former Conservatives. These people have never voted before. Or they voted only for Brexit. They could never vote Conservative, but they feel comfortable voting for Reform. They're the people that I fight for every single day. Right? It's not to say that if you've ever voted Conservative in the past, we don't want your vote. Of course we do. I voted Conservative in the past. But I don't think anyone would accuse me of being some kind of ECHR loving net zero fanatic that thinks mass migration has been a universal good for the country, like so many Conservatives have said over the years. We've got to get this right, and we will get this right. Promise you this. So, my friends, that's it for Wednesday's wreckage, right? You've got the BBC biased against Reform exposed. You've got Miliband's 30, that hike going up on our energy bills. You've got covering the Ritz in manure by the privileged Pratts. You've got Glasgow's third foreign classrooms. You've got Lammy gutting juries because patriots like Jamie, the Royal Marine, former Marine, walk free. You've got the Financial Times fueling panic amid Tory defections, but no betrayal on our watch. Reform rises, 124 net gains since May. Fresh wins in Long Eaton North, in Hetton, in Hunstanton. The Tories and the Labour are a moribund husk, a former shell of their once notorious selves. But the media rigs the coverage, they rig the borders, they rig the courts, but they don't rig our ballots. That's your chance to implement genuine change, right? So if you haven't already, join Reform, because common sense ain't quitting, it's conquering, especially on this channel. So next week I'll be back, of course, but if you enjoyed this one, please do smash that like button. Please do hit subscribe if you haven't already for more recent takedowns like this. We are a small independent channel. Your support helps keep us free. If you want to hear more from me, go to www.darrengrimes.com. We've got an exclusive Substack community and a chat community in which Grumpy Grandad reigns as king. And support us however you can. Join the party, support Reasoned UK, spread the word, back the fight, my friends, because you are not alone. I promise you that. You are not alone. Good night and God bless.